Well, hello, DLD. My name's Rohan Silva, as you just heard, and I'm co-founder of a company called Second Home. Until just a couple of years ago, I was working for the Prime Minister. That's me and him having a very awkward hug at my leaving party. But truth be told, I'm not very interested in politics. My great obsession is seeing what happens when different industries, disciplines, and types of people come together, which is why I love being at DLD so much. And I want to talk to you today about how our buildings and our cities and our architecture can support this type of collaboration and innovation. In other words, in a sense, how we might be able to create spaces in which it's like DLD every single day of the week, if you can cope with that. I want to start by telling you a story, and the story begins in World War II, time 1941, when my country, Britain, and Germany weren't quite as good friends as they are right now. And in 1941, bombs were raining down on the sky, and a million buildings in London were destroyed. And one of those buildings was the House of Parliament. And this is the House of Commons debating chamber. This is what it looked like before the war. And by the end of the war, it ended up looking something like this. Now, you might think, what's the big deal? No parliamentary debating chamber. That probably just means, fewer politicians, right? That's kind of a good thing. But actually in Britain, this sparked a huge debate after the war. And the debate really centered around how Parliament should be rebuilt. And there were people saying, well, maybe this is an opportunity, actually, to rebuild Parliament in a new way, to create a horseshoe-shaped debating chamber like they were building for the UN, or maybe just at least make Parliament a bit bigger, because you can't actually fit all the MPs on the benches in Parliament. But there was one man who said this was a terrible idea and opposed it. And he was quite a big deal at the time. His name was Winston Churchill. And he really stuck two fingers up at this idea. He insisted that Parliament was rebuilt exactly, brick for brick, inch for inch, as it was before. And his rationale, his argument, was that the architecture of Parliament was absolutely bound up in the pattern of British democracy. And he made his argument by saying something that has resonated through the decades. He said, first we shape our buildings, and thereafter they shape us. First, we create our environments, and then our environments indelibly, deeply shape our behavior. Now, what I think is interesting today is the world is changing incredibly fast. You know this better than anyone else. We live at a time when technology means that starting a business and reaching a global market is cheaper than ever before. So there's been this explosion of small businesses. In the UK, just take one example. In the 1970s, there were about 700,000 small businesses. Today, there's 5.2 million. Another shift, another fascinating change in the world today is the importance of clustering and physical proximity. I mean, all of us right now, theoretically, could be plugging in and watching this kind of conference via Skype or YouTube, but we don't do that. We get together in physical environments. This chart shows the explosion of one cluster in East London, but you see the same around the world. So these twin trends, an explosion in entrepreneurship, a growing importance of clustering, how is that being reflected in our cities today? I don't think it is. It's true that there are now great startup spaces. This is Google Campus in London. Cheap, flexible, open plan spaces. But what happens when you want to grow your company, when you want to build your team? How is the built environment supporting that? Well, you might have Regus-type flexible offices, really not good for you. Places like WeWork, kind of cookie cutter, Regus 2.0, don't allow entrepreneurs to really collide and have those serendipitous collisions they need. And I think what's a real shame here is that the big companies have been able to respond to these shifts. Pixar created an environment, a huge atrium where collisions and proximity can happen. Apple designing a huge new space where different teams can come together. What I think, though, is that the growing companies deserve places like this, deserve environments that support the kinds of things, the collaboration, the creativity, the innovation that we all care about. And so after I left politics, I wanted to earn an honest living away from the Prime Minister. And so I took over an empty building, an old carpet factory in East London. And I brought in the most radical architects I could find. They're a practice called Selgas Cano. This is their studio in Madrid. And they were architects in residence at MIT when we appointed them. And the reason they were at MIT is that their work thinks deeply about how nature, evolutionary psychology, and other types of insights can be used to shape environments that can shape us in the right way. So their buildings are full of color. So the building of theirs in Cartagena, full of curves, but critically also full of plants and nature, and have a deep connection with nature, where after all, we all evolved. And what we ended up creating, our building Second Home, looks like this. It's an environment with essentially no straight lines, because of course, in the natural world, in nature, there are no straight lines. Our builders still haven't forgiven us for doing that, by the way. Our building is also full of excuses and places to collide and come together. We have a restaurant at the front of the building where the head chef is the former head chef of Ottolenghi, one of the best restaurants in London, and a real mixing pot and melting pot. We've created private studios, fully soundproofed, surrounded by plants and trees, so you can be in your own private world, but then you step out and you're in a space full of collisions, people bringing you together, and incredible excitement. There's actually 1,000 plants and trees inside our building as we harness nature. And it's really become an environment in which companies are growing really fast and new collaborations are happening. Sort of, as I say, kind of DLD in building form. We also think that bringing people together in crazy ways might make a difference too. So in the middle of our building is a table that weighs 1.5 tons. You can see the sort of white table there. It weighs 1.5 tons, and every evening that table gets lifted up on motorized pulleys through the middle of the building, creating an auditorium, an event space. And we work with partners like Vice and Virgin, the Design Museum and Gagosian Gallery to really expose our community to as diverse a range of thinkers as possible. And the nice thing, a bit like DLD, is that you create somewhere that resonates, that is shaped around the structural trends that are redesigning our economy, and great things happen. So, we've had the likes of Stella McCartney come and speak, and the architect Richard Rogers, and filmmaker Danny Boyle, Richard Branson, and so on. And it's really been exciting to see how companies have come together. When we opened in late 2014, every single US tech company that opened an office in London that autumn opened at Second Home. But of course, we're curating the most diverse range of industries possible. So it's not just tech. We have fashion, design, filmmaking, life sciences, and so on. We have a novelist in residence, a lady called Tamima Amam, who's just finished her second novel at Second Home. And it's a really amazing mix. If you look at the top studio up there, for the last 12 months, that's belonged to Santander, the biggest bank in Europe, for their fintech fund. And just below them is a very strange company called Roosterpunk that no one's probably heard of yet. And Roosterpunk are a really radical storytelling company. And so to have one of the biggest companies in Europe, cheek by jowl, on top of a really exciting emerging company is really what we're all about. And we see our job not just to curate, not just to use architecture, but to stir the pot and bring everyone together. We were quite unlucky in a sense because we were completely full before we'd even opened. But in May this year, we've got 3 new floors opening up. And we're really going to be turning it up to 11 with these new floors. They're going to have 7 full-size trees growing between the floors under full-spectrum, natural light LEDs, and plants and trees growing in the corridors. So just the most incredible, creative place to work. The very top of the building, the fifth floor, will be this club space. And we're actually going to be flooding about a third of that space. And there'll be water lilies floating on the water and bulrushes growing. It's going to look something like this up there. The thinking being that, as you know, being around people all the time can be very tiring. So creating environments where you can hide away, be away from people is incredibly important, I think, for creativity. And one of the ways in which architecture, the built environment, can shape our behavior in the best possible way. We've got great new companies moving in, people like Atomico, Nick Zenstrom's venture capital fund, the guy who founded Skype and so on, and companies like Artsy. So it's a really exciting moment because, of course, with every new person that joins any community, DLD, Second Home, and so on, the number of potential connections scales exponentially. So it's a hugely exciting time for us. One guy who I think really understood the power of architecture in shaping behavior is Steve Jobs. He designed the Pixar building that I flagged up earlier. And in sort of homage of Steve Jobs and also in homage of DLD, I wanted as well to talk about one more thing that we've never talked about before at Second Home. Our mission to try and use architecture to shape behavior and bring about creativity and collaboration doesn't just apply to London. And there's another city in Europe right now that I think has incredible energy and many, many different industries that can be brought together. And that city is Lisbon. And we're very, very excited that in May this year, in just a few months' time, Second Home is going to be launching in Lisbon. We are we're moving into a fantastic building on the waterfront called the Mercado de Ribeira in an old red light district. And that building has been transformed into the most incredible hub. It's got this huge food market in it. And there's actually 4 Michelin-starred chefs in that market you see there. And Second Home has the whole of the first floor looking down on this incredible space. And what's really exciting to us is being able to do what I hope we've been able to do in London, which is show what happens when almost every type of industry you can imagine, from media to fashion to advertising and design, all come together and collide. There's going to be the most incredible working environment with vaulting roofs. We're bringing a bookshop to our space as well as a bar to drink your way through the night. And what to us is really exciting, as always, is not just the architecture, not just the design, but the curation and the collisions, the serendipity that's going to follow. For all of you who happen to be in London, happen to be in Lisbon, I hope it's somewhere that you'll very much feel at home. So it was Winston Churchill then who, in sticking 2 fingers up against the thinking of the time, made this great statement, this wise statement, that first we shape our buildings and thereafter they shape us. I think that there's an opportunity over the next 10, 20 years to really rethink our cities. This is the first moment in human history that more than half the world's population live in urban areas and cities. And so I think if we get this right, incredible things are going to happen. If the way I sort of look at things is that any friend of DLD's and anyone here is a friend of Second Home's. And so if you happen to be in London, if you happen to be in Lisbon, it'd be absolutely wonderful to welcome you in and show you around and maybe even bring about a creative collision or two. Thank you very much.